Donald Trump reacting to reports about what a second term would look like and concerns that he would govern as an authoritarian. Donald Trump is no longer merely suggesting he'll be a dictator should he win a second term. Now, he's just coming right out and he's saying it. Watch.
I want to go back to this one issue, though, because the media has been focused on this and attacking you. Under no circumstances. You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
what?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border and I want to drill.
That's not retribution. I'm going to be, you know, he keeps, we love this guy. He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
Other than day one, which is another way of saying, yep. It's a frightening new flashpoint in a trend that we have monitored for years, one that has accelerated at light speed this week. Alone, Trump might be powerless to act on such threats. But Trump, he is not alone. You just heard people gleefully cheer for a day one dictatorship. He has support among Republican voters and a permission structure among GOP lawmakers that nearly allowed him to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power in January of 2021. What's more, he now has a greater understanding of the levers of power in government and an inner circle evidently hell-bent on actualizing his worst impulses. Remember Kash Patel? He's the Trump loyalist who served on the National Security Council, the guy Trump reportedly wanted to make deputy director at the CIA or the FBI. He may very well be in the conversation for such a position, or an even bigger one, in the next Trump presidency. Listen to this conversation with Steve Bannon.
Kash, I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you.
Just so we're clear, that's a would-be intelligence official for a self-admitted day one dictator, celebrating the idea of prosecuting journalists for, doing their jobs. Like we said, these aren't hints about what Trump will do in a second term. They are promises. Joining us now, former U.S. attorney and co-host of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, Joyce Vance, plus political strategist Matt Dowd, and Jason Johnson is here. Matt Dowd, I want to tie two threads together because we are coming on air as a scene is unfolding in Nevada. One of the things we're reminded of is that the FBI would be on the scene, that the FBI was there to add support. And we talk about someone like Kash Patel potentially being the head of the FBI and serving at the hands of a man who said, given many opportunities to say, no, I don't have any dictatorial ambitions. No, actually took the bait and said, yes, day one. And day one, my priorities are the border and drilling, not dealing with any of the real problems that are unfolding in this country.
Well, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because your past hour of heartbreaking reporting is directly related to what Donald Trump is envisioning for America. They're directly intertwined because at the basis of democracy, which Donald Trump and many of his supporters seem to want to throw away in order to sort of get whatever the cult leader seems to want in the course of this. The basis for democracy is ensuring the common good and reflecting the will of the people. Those are the basics for democracy. And those are the only two ways we're going to get any common sense gun reform in our country. And as I listen to all of this, the facts, and you and I have had this conversation, and the other panel members have been in this conversation before. We've already had 40,000 gun deaths this year, 40,000. We've had 2,000 multiple gun fatality shootings in the last 3 years. 2,000, not 200, 2,000 in this. And it's directly tied because if Donald Trump has his way, and I would say it's Donald Trump, but it's also the path of many of his followers. And the thing that's going to be different if Donald Trump wins, I know a lot of people say, well, we have these guardrails in place and they're going to ensure that this happens. Well, Donald Trump has already said he's going to remove most of those guardrails. He's not going to have a Mike Pence as vice president that will stop him from continuing on in the presidency. He's not going to have the people in the cabinet that will hold him accountable and not do things as Secretary of Defense that he demands in the course of this. He's going to have loyalists who are going to do exactly what he says, a la dictatorship. And if people, and just the basis of why these two issues, the threat to our democracy and gun reform and what happens in gun violence, are so tied together, if the listeners could just understand, and I know people are dissatisfied with the economy as they see it, but if you want common sense gun reform, you don't vote for Donald Trump. If you want anything done on any of the major issues, you don't vote for Donald Trump and the Republicans in the course of this. That's why these two issues are so interlinked, because it's the will of the people at stake.
Matt just listed a number of the guardrails that should be in place,
right,
that Donald Trump could dismantle. One of them could be members of the U.S. Senate who get to make decisions about whether or not they confirm some of these appointees. That brings you to the question of GOP lawmakers, because I know it's easy to watch Kash Patel talk and say, okay, this is red meat,
right,
this is Steve Bannon. I want you to take a listen. Yesterday, Liz Cheney was on with Nicole, and this is what she said about GOP lawmakers.
This is a situation where you have the Republican Party actively trying to ensure that people to whitewash what happened on the 6th and to collaborate with the former president. I think that's a really important point, because the threat that he poses wouldn't be so significant if people had done the right thing, had said, no, that's not who we are. But instead, there is obviously this embrace of him and this collaboration with the very damaging efforts he's undertaken.
Were the faces of January 6 rioters to protect their identity. He has an entire elected infrastructure around him.
Yeah. This is what's so dangerous about what Trump just said. Not that it was new, right? Yep. Imagine, a Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer. You never have a serial killer out on the street and say, hey, you're going to kill again? It's like, only day one. I'll only eat people on day one. Then after that, I promise you can trust me.
And a crowd that roars.
And a crowd that's cheering, saying, see, he's only going to eat one person. We know who Donald Trump is. Here's what's dangerous. And it's not just the Kash Patels, as you pointed out. It's the whole Project 2025, right? They've already laid out a handbook for how we're going to gut the entire bureaucracy and put in nothing but individuals who will guarantee that Trump is insulated from the law, from investigations, and from any guardrails. We can't trust members of Congress because half of them were pretty much covering up what happened on January 6th anyway. So it's absolutely necessary for the American people. It is literally on the American people and the current administration to make sure that those people can vote to make sure that this never happens. Because left to guardrails, left to our better angels, we're in trouble.
Right. The American people become the ultimate guardrail in that sense. Joyce Vance, the January 6th Select Committee, it showed how major figures at the Justice Department, they threatened to resign en masse if Trump installed a loyalist as AG. What happens if instead of people like that, Trump does have legal loyalists who are willing to do whatever it takes to satisfy their boss? What then?
Right. I think we're talking about the difference between someone like Mike Pence, who obviously signed on with the understanding that he had to be personally loyal, even though at the end he did the right thing. But compare that to a Jim Comey who declined to extend his personal loyalty to Trump rather famously. And the fact that Trump, now a wiser, I use the word wiser advisedly, but the 2.0 version of Trump, will make sure that those loyalty oaths are an explicit condition in order for people to become political appointees in the administration that we all hope we won't see in 2025. Then the question becomes, can the career people form some sort of a guardrail? We know that Trump is already committed as part of the 2025 project that Jason was mentioning to rooting out people in the career civil service who are simply committed to doing a good job regardless of which party is in power. So, Alicia, the point here is that people need to pay attention. Trump is not trying to hide the ball on what his plans are for a second administration. It could very well be the end of the rule of law, because that's, in fact, what all of this adds up to. A government that's loyal to Trump, an authoritarian leader, as opposed to an elected constitutional republic where leaders are responsible to the people who elect them.
Where there are people who are loyal to him. Let's talk then about the Attorney General. I want to play something else. This is from September, and it has to do with a person named Mike Davis. Take a listen.
There's a couple people that you could put in positions like that. We talk about Mike Davis as Attorney General.
During my 3-week reign of terror as Trump acting attorney general before I get chased out of town with my Trump pardon, I will rain hell on Washington, D.C. We've talked about this, Ben. I have 5 lists ready to go, and they're growing. List number 1, we're going to fire. We're going to fire a lot of people in the executive branch and the deep state. We're going to indict Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden and every other scumball, sleazeball Biden. I'm going to recommend a lot of pardons. Every January 6th defendant is going to get a pardon.
So, Jason, before I go to Joyce to talk about the stakes of if that person actually had power, why do they treat this like fantasy draft football?
Because they have a base that's not going to hold them accountable, right? Like, think about the base that's voting for these people. They're dealing with the same inflation. They're dealing with their children being shot at in mass shootings. They're dealing with gas prices fluctuating. They're dealing with jobs, healthcare, all the real issues. But they don't care. They don't care. They don't want a party anymore. They want a revenge tour. They want someone to shake the table. You no longer have a functioning party. I say this all the time. The Republicans are basically a personality cult at this point. So they're able to act this way because the people who vote for them no longer expect to receive policy anymore. They want an emotional response. And the danger of this is, since we only have one functioning party, the functioning party needs to put the guardrails in now. They need to start putting policies in now, saying, hey, you can't do this. We're going to make this constitutional. We're going to put this into policy. We're going to make sure people can vote. Because if you don't do it now, and the off chance that Trump gets into office, there will be nothing to stop him if you don't establish that these things are illegal now.
I don't know that I fully buy this idea that people don't care about their kids' safety or the cost of things. But where I do think you're right is I think they have been sold this idea that the government cannot be the agent for those things and that there is such dysfunction that you might as well, as you said, flip the table. Joyce Vance, if that person were in fact the attorney general of the United States of America, what then is on the line?
Right. Everything is on the line. That's, a macabre Saturday Night Live version of what an attorney general should be, because we have due process in this country. Criminal prosecutions aren't meant to be a political weapon. And yet that's precisely what he's talking about in that clip. And perhaps more frighteningly, that's Donald Trump's vision for the future, an America where the Justice Department is just another political tool at his disposal.